how did we make the rest of the world buy these things, which we did? Speculative boom. We added something. It was really charming. We attached, with a stapler, we attached to each of these securities that gave you a cut of the debts of other people an insurance policy. It's wonderful. The insurance policy says that in the event that any of the people that have to pay back the debts that you get a piece of were to fail to do that, don't worry, the insurance company will take care of it. Now there's no risk at all, is there? And so everybody around the world, governments, corporations, pension funds, all kinds of things around the world bought these things. Good rate of return, AAA rating with an insurance policy. Only problem was that the insurance companies that wrote these policies, led by the largest insurance company in the world, the AIG Corporation, didn't want them to be called insurance policies because we have had experience with insurance in the history of the United States. And that experience, to put it simply, is that they are thieves. And so in every one of the 50 states, there's an insurance commission that they have to satisfy about the policies they write because we wouldn't trust them with a quarter. So it was decided we can't call these insurance policies that we're attaching to these speculative investments, we can't call them insurance policies because then we would actually have to go in front of the commission and show them how much money we have to pay off these claims if, God forbid, they would ever come here. So we didn't call them insurance policies, we called them credit default swaps. And if you've ever wondered what a credit default swap is, that's what it is. It's an insurance policy that can't be called that. That way, AIG could write them as it did, by the millions and the billions, without any money to back it up. So in 2008, when suddenly millions of people couldn't pay their credit card bills or their student loans or their mortgages, or developers of a shopping center had too many vacancies and couldn't cover their... Suddenly, everybody who had one of these investments ran to the insurer and said, oh, I'm your insurance policy, pay. At which point AIG turned to the world and said, have a nice day. We don't have the money. It was at that moment that the United States government came in and took over the AIG company, which the government still owns, 80% of it. AIG is not a private corporation. It is a government corporation, largest insurance company in the world. Because if it hadn't, the millions of people whose pensions come from those investments would have had to write a letter to some of you, I can see from your gray hair. You would have gotten a letter in the mail from your pension fund saying, last month your pension was $1,482, and this time it'll be $403. Have a nice month. That was what was going to have to happen unless the government came in and simply said, we will honor everything that AIG ever wrote. The United States became the insurer of the defunct speculative paper that had been created out of this wild euphoria of wealth that came when the wages of American workers stopped going up. Okay, so here we come then to 2007. The game is over. The workers can't work more, they can't borrow anymore, they can't buy anymore, they can't pay back their debts, and all the speculative paper built on that mountain of phony credit collapsed too. That's what happens in the last quarter of 2008. And the American government, believe me, I've met plenty of my students who are in fairly high positions in the United States government. They had no idea what they were facing and no idea what to do. All these wonderful speeches about we have it under control, those are meant to keep you from running hysterically out of your house into the street where you will bump into other people doing the same thing. To avoid that, it is important for our politicians to pretend that everything is understood and under control. They had no idea what to do. None. They panicked. All the banks were defunct. That is, all the banks had been in on this game, had lent out money to people who bought those instruments, who couldn't therefore pay back, so the banks didn't have the money with which to even honor the depositors' deposits. They couldn't give you back the money in your checking account or your savings account. All of the banks were taken over. It's very important here in our country because we have such a overwhelmingly ideological fog that we live in, that you all understand that private capitalism crashed completely in 2008 and 9. The government came in and kept it going. And the government is still going. In the last 2 years, 97% of all mortgages written in the United States are either in the hands of or guaranteed by the United States government. There is no housing market. The value of your house would be half what it is now without the government's support. There is no private capitalism. We are on life support from the United States government. In that period of time, as everything crashes, what did the government do? Very important. The government decided to throw an unspeakable amount of money into the financial markets to get them to function again. Because what had happened was when all these investments went bad, no bank knew who to deal with, because no bank trusted any other bank, since each bank knew that it possessed so many bad investments that it couldn't honor any demand on it, and it presumed the same in every other bank. It meant that banks no longer transacted with one another, and we're an economy based on credit. You can't function if nobody will lend, and nobody did. So the government came in and decided the solution is to allow the banks to continue. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to print money and flood the banks with it. We're going to buy or borrow the bad investments, these securities that aren't worth anything. We're going to buy them from the company at what the price was, not what the price is. We're going to lend them. We're going to purchase special new stock issues in these. We're going to give the banks, all of them, the money to get going again. And we're going to tell them, this is now for the benefit of the public, so I'll repeat it. We're going to tell them that we're giving you all this money, but we want you, wave the finger, we want you to lend it out to people and to lend it out to businesses because we want to get the economy going again. Whereupon the bankers looked at the politicians and said, are you crazy? Lend it to who? Those people? The American working class? They're busted. That's how we got into this trouble. They can't pay anything back. I'm going to lend it to them. And the corporations, they got no customers anymore. We're not going to lend any money to them. They also got it. So, of course, we're not going to lend the money out. We're going to take it from you, rebuild our balance sheets, get ourselves back into order, but we're not lending to anybody because that would be, you'll love this, you have to appreciate the humor here. They said it would be irresponsible to do that, and they had a point. They had a point. So what was hoped for was that the money given to the banks, over $1.5 trillion and more if you count a lot of the guarantees that were given, guarantees of their debts, the hope was it would somehow filter down to the rest of us. Now that kind of theory has a name, comes out of the Great Depression. It was called in those days trickle-down economics. The idea is very sophisticated. It goes like this. If you put water at the top, it comes to the bottom. You see, we're going to give financial help to the biggest, richest corporations, and it'll trickle down to everyone else. The reason it fell out of favor was the fact that it never got very far down. People seemed to grab it along the way and deflect it. So we couldn't call it trickle-down economics anymore. So we called it lots of other names, but it's the exact same idea. And it didn't work in the 1930s, and it didn't work this time either. What have we had over the last year and a half, 2 years? We've had unprecedented amounts of money basically given to corporations. General Motors, AIG, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. Along the way, again, you need a sense of humor. Along the way, remarkable little moments. In the height of the crisis, it was said, we have a terrible problem in America. We have banks that are, remember the phrase, too big to fail. So the government, therefore, must rescue them because they're too big to fail. What do we have now? We had two before that were too big to fail. Bank of America, for example, and Merrill Lynch. Two companies too big to fail. What did the government do? Ready? Merged them. Wells Fargo was too big to fail, and Wachovia, a very big bank, was too big to fail. And what have we done with them? Merged them. We now have entities that are bigger than they were when the crisis began. I told you, you needed a sense of humor. Is this a government that understands the policy and has a consistent program? Don't be silly. What is this recovery? The banks are doing well. The stock market, where the banks lend the money for the play, is doing okay. Unemployment, a disaster. Unemployment, let's go through it. Because it's the best single measure of how an economy is doing. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is the office in the Department of Labor that keeps the records. They actually keep several different kinds of unemployment statistics. The most interesting one is not the one you hear about. How many adults are without work looking for work? A number that's about 10% these days. The most interesting is what they call U-6. If you go Google them, you can find out about it. That's a number that is a much better measure. Here's what it measures. The number of adults looking for work unable to find it, plus the number of people who have a part-time job only because they can't find a full-time job and they want one. And the third group added in are those who used to be called discouraged workers and are now called, in a change of name that ought to give you pause, marginalized workers. These are the people who've stopped looking. They don't have a job, but they're not looking anymore. When you add these three together, U6, 17.5% of the American working class is in one of those three categories. 1 out of 6, every American family has somebody in its circle of husband, sister-in-law, uncle, cousin, who's in that situation, which means as they run out of their savings, which we didn't have much to begin with, become burdens on the rest of the family, making sure that the unemployment problem becomes a problem for everybody.